Hello and welcome back. This is Color Studies Part 2, and we will be picking up where we left off with Part 1 using the same three primaries that we used before. These are the three that I used. Feel free to use your own, but keep those consistent. Use the same ones that you did in Part 1. And then I recommend the addition of titanium white and ivory black. So we'll introduce those two new colors to our studies today. And we're back to our color wheel here. And in Part 1, we filled in the outer ring with all of our primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And now we'll go ahead and address that second inner ring, and that will be our series of tints. So what we'll do is we'll start with titanium white for each one of these, and then we'll add a little bit of each corresponding color to create the tinted version of it. For those of you working in watercolor at home, instead of adding titanium white to your outer ring of colors, you'll actually just be using additional water so that you'll be thinning out your paints even more, making them more transparent, and the whiteness of the paper will show through, creating that tint effect for you. And back to the palette now. We have all of the colors that we've used for the outer ring still waiting here and available for us. If you're working in acrylic, or if it's been a few days since you completed Part 1, you may need to remix some of these and freshen them up. Or if you're working with paints that dry very fast, you may want to just go ahead and mix them as you go, instead of mixing them all beforehand before using them like I'm doing here. So let's go ahead and start by taking a little bit of our titanium white, and then a little bit at a time, we'll pull some of our blue in there. Now again, there isn't just one correct answer to this question. We could use the tiniest little hint of blue. We can use more as needed, as long as there's some white in there. It does qualify as a tint. However, we do want to have a nice, strong, discernible difference from our original color. So as long as what I have for my tint on the wheel is substantially different from the original color, I know I'm doing very well, and I can be happy with my work. And now for the red violet. A little bit of that color really goes a long way. Even though we're using a titanium white, which is a very bold, opaque white, it's still much weaker than most of the other pigments that we're using here. So if we go too far in one direction, we could always go back and add more white, or if we have too much white, we could add more of the other color. But going slowly at a time is the best way to really get familiar with your pigments and the effect that they're going to have on one another without too much trial and error, which tends to take up a lot of time and a lot of paint. just like a coloring book, we'll use those beautiful tints that we just mixed up to go ahead and fill in that second ring of our color wheel. So the tinted yellow will go right under the yellow, the tinted orange will go right under the orange, and so forth, so that each corresponding color has its own slice of the pizza. Great! So now our ring of tints is complete, and what this does is it gives us a good idea of the lighter or pastel version of the original color, which is what happens when we add white, but also it gives us an idea of what would happen if we had a sphere of any one of these given colors and we were to shine a bright light source on it. That hot spot, that highlight, would be very similar to what we see here in our tints. Great. Now our next ring is going to be the most difficult out of all 4 of the rings, and that's the third layer, and that is going to be the exploration of our neutral version of the original color. So if you're ever not sure what to add to achieve that part, all you have to do is look directly across from that original color. So what we'll be doing is mixing complements, which means one color directly across from the other is that color's complement, and vice versa. They're opposites, yet they relate in a very exciting, very interesting way. And this leads us into a very, very broad, wide, and versatile world of our neutrals. But we'll start very simply once again. So we'll take our yellow-green, for example, that starting color that we used for the outer ring, and then by putting in just a tiny, tiny little touch of the red-violet, which is located directly across on the wheel, we'll achieve a very neutral version of that yellow-green. We want it to still resemble the original color, but it'll be a brownish, more of a neutral version of that color. I'll show you what I mean. Let's get going. And here we go. Taking our yellow-green first, that original one that we started with on the outer ring, and now I'm going to add just the tiniest, tiniest little bit of the red violet, which is located directly across from it on the color wheel. Just a tiny, tiny little bit is all that we need. We could always add more, but we can't add less. Starting to turn more neutral, a bit more brownish. Sometimes very unexpected things can happen, which keeps life exciting. Make sure that's mixed thoroughly. All right. And now I could either just take my palette knife and hold it up to that original color to make sure that it's different enough. But also, again, I want it to resemble my original color. If it looks too much just like an undiscernible brown, then I know that I've gone too far and I've put too much of that complement in there. Okay. Next, let's go for the yellow. So we'll take a little bit of that original yellow. And the color directly across from the yellow is my violet. So the violet is what I will add to create that neutral. Just the tiniest, tiniest little bit. Especially with those very pale colors, they tend to be a lot more susceptible to adjustment when we add the very deep, bold colors to them. So be careful. We don't want to go too far, too fast. We can explore this world of the neutrals in greater depth later, but for now, let's just go one little step in that direction. There we go. And that yellow still resembles yellow now, but it's more of a mustard yellow, more of a neutral yellow. Definitely deeper, definitely more brownish than what I started with. do one more. Let's look at, ooh, I know. We'll look at our orange here, and the orange is directly across from the blue. So we'll start with our orange, and that's the original orange, not the tinted one that we put the white in, but our original bold saturated orange. And I'm just going to add the tiniest little bit of the blue to it, just a little touch. And my orange will get nice and rusty. Oh, here, let's do a little more. Almost like a burnt orange. Okay. And here we have our halfway through this third ring. And just to show you how rusty that orange really gets with that little tiny bit of blue added, however, it still resembles our orange. The red is a very deep brick red, but it still does look like a shade of red. It's just not necessarily as vivid and saturated as the original red because it has that addition of a tiny, tiny bit of green, since green is the complement of red. So if your color ends up looking too brown, or if it just doesn't even remotely resemble that original color anymore, then it's definitely time to dial it back, add more of what you started with, and that way each piece of the pie will have a consistency and will be recognizable adjustments and variations on the same color. Wonderful. Now that we have this third layer completely filled in, we have a beautiful array of neutral colors. And in the process, we've become very familiar with the complements and which colors are directly across from one another, how they're interrelated, as well as how all of those colors on the outer ring are directly related to whatever is next to them. Also, it's very valuable to have a reference with these different versions of each color, because sometimes when we're looking at real objects and photos, when we're experiencing colors in the real world, we tend to put things in certain categories, and sometimes what we think of as a blue-green or as a red-orange or an orange can be deceiving, and sometimes things aren't quite as vivid and saturated as we think they are, and being able to hold it up directly against something really gives us the proper perspective. So now let's go ahead and fill in that center ring, and we'll use our little bit of ivory black that we're introducing today, and we'll add just the tiniest little touch of that black to the color that we started with on the outer ring. And now we're back to the palette, and I cleaned mine off a little bit just to make some space, but we do have all of those original colors from our outer ring. If you have run low on certain colors, or if some of them have kind of mushed around into one another and cross-pollinated, no problem at all. You can go ahead and either just to scrape that off, maybe take a towel and wipe it clean, and then you can start fresh with a new color. Just as long as we have all of those original 12 colors located on the outer ring, as well as a little bit of our ivory black on the side to create our shades. So here I go. I'm just going to add a tiny little bit of the black at a time. You can always add more, but once you go too far, you're making more work for yourself and using more paint. And I have just the tiniest little whisper of black. And a little really goes a long way. right, so now it's time to fill in that inner core with those shades that we've just created, and we'll complete our color wheel today. This is so satisfying. It's like putting puzzle pieces together in a jigsaw puzzle and they fit exactly where they need to be, or putting those numbers into a Sudoku puzzle and completing the circuit. And you may want to choose a brush with a finer point than we've been using up until now, because we want to be able to work that paint into those little tiny corners, and this is great practice for that as well. And there we have it, our finished color wheel. And if you're having trouble with that center core, that series of shades, and things are getting too dark and it just looks like one big black dot in the center there, go ahead and just add more of that original color to what you have, and that'll push it closer to resembling that starting color. So each piece of the pie will have variations on each theme on its own. And this gives us a full scope too of in the three-dimensional world. Again, if we have a sphere that's red and we shine a very bright light source on it, that tint will look very similar to that hot spot, that highlight, but then our shade will be very similar to the underside of that sphere, the area that is not getting much light at all. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed it. And stay tuned for part number 3, which will be a little bit more of a challenge. We'll explore that deep, vast realm of the neutrals. I hope that you're well. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.